Hello everyone, welcome to the Organic Agriculture webinar series. Today we are in discussion with Mr. Simon Nihalbel. Mr. Simon represents European Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka, and at the same time he is the Managing Director of Amber Estates. Welcome to the program, Simon.
Thank you, Chatra. It's a pleasure to be here and very excited to be part of this initiative.
Mr. Simon, why don't we start with a brief introduction to yourself?
Well, as you may have guessed from my name, Simon Nihalbel, I was actually born here in Sri Lanka. Don't look like your typical Sri Lankan, but I was born here and grew up primarily in India, actually. And I have been, together with three others, sponsoring Amber Estate, which is a social enterprise in the highlands of Sri Lanka, in the Uva Highlands. And we are an agro-tourism enterprise. We actually export a whole range of products to more than 20 countries around the world. We are organic. And in addition, I am on the Food and Agriculture Committee of the European Chamber of Commerce here in Sri Lanka. Just by way of background, I was educated initially in India, then in the UK, went to university in the UK, and then to graduate school in the US. And I've spent most of the last 30 years working as a consultant, primarily on economic development issues in different countries around the world, everywhere from Latin America to Africa to many parts of Asia, and primarily working with agricultural value chains, helping countries to develop more competitive value chains in everything from tea and coffee to spices to horticulture, floriculture, and so on.
Thank you for that introduction. So it's quite interesting because you wear two hats at the same time. You represent European Chamber of Commerce, and at the same time you are a producer of organic products. So I'll start with your engagement with the European Chamber of Commerce. Simon, can you touch upon your engagement with the ECCSL, please?
Well, the European Chamber itself has existed for more than 20 years now. And the objective of the Chamber is to promote investment and trade between Europe. And I should add, it's all of the countries of Europe, not just the European Union, but also other countries within Europe that are not necessarily part of the European Union. To promote trade between all of those countries and Sri Lanka in both directions, both helping European investors looking at opportunities in Sri Lanka, helping European buyers. We have a lot of requests and inquiries from wholesalers, distributors, retailers in Europe looking to source products from Sri Lanka, and then obviously helping Sri Lankan companies, both small, medium, and large, identify opportunities for trade with Europe. My own engagement, I guess I joined the Chamber more than 10 years ago, largely because of some other work that I'd been doing to help the IT sector in Sri Lanka expand their footprint. And the Chamber then asked me to come onto the board there. And more recently, I've taken over responsibility for running the Food and Agriculture Committee.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for that brief introduction on the European Chamber of Commerce. Now, Simon, the exporters or the producers who are viewing this video are interested in recalling some of the recent initiatives that you have done with ECCSL. Can we explain some of those recent initiatives?
Yes, absolutely. It's a wide range. Some of the initiatives are B2B events and activities, often requested by our partners in Europe. We recently did some B2B events with the Dutch, the Royal Netherlands Embassy, introducing, again, potential buyers from the Netherlands to exporters from Sri Lanka. We've done in the last year similar events with the Belgians. We have an ongoing relationship with several chambers of commerce in Europe, like the Austrian Chamber of Commerce, the Flemish Chamber of Commerce, the Manchester Business Chamber, where their members, it's not so much sort of B2B events, but where they're looking for, again, a particular product. There was an inquiry last week for mangosteens and rambutan. There was one the month before for organic coconut suppliers, all the different types of coconut products. So in those cases, it's more that we're sending out email messages to all of our members saying, you know, is anybody able to supply these products or to recommend others who are able to do so. Then there are webinars, such as this series sponsored by GIZ, but in many cases, not just in the agricultural sector, but in the tourism sector, in the transport sector. We have had, particularly during the years of COVID, a lot of online webinars to bring our members up to date with latest trends in a particular issue and so on. And then before COVID, and hopefully again after COVID, we most typically have been holding events, physical events, mainly in Colombo. Again, they might be around a particular trading opportunity, or they might be around a new trend. We had a recent event where the European Union delegation was explaining to our members about the impact of sanctions at the moment and what steps that Sri Lankan exporters need to take in order to be compliant with those rules. They might be a session on GSP plus requirements for Sri Lanka, or latest trends in transportation and shipping options for exporters from Sri Lanka. So it's a range of, a lot of activities are informational activities, making sure that businesses, exporters in Sri Lanka are up to date with the latest information. And then a lot are B2B introductions, both physical, virtual online events, and as I say, just specific requests that come through from our partners in Europe.
Thank you for that brief note on the activities that European Chamber of Commerce has been doing for the last couple of years. It seems like there are very interesting activities. So my question to you, Simon, is you mentioned exporters. Apart from exporters, who are the other stakeholders that joins with you? That's one question. The next one is, what is the usual modality in collaborating with your programs?
Our members obviously range across all sectors. So for instance, in the transportation and logistics sector, they're not exporters, but they are companies that are very interested in trade in Europe and managing that trade. And so they are joining in order to share their expertise and hopefully find customers for their shipping and logistics expertise. In the tourism sector, we have most of the big hotel companies, but many smaller boutique companies that are here in Sri Lanka, and again are looking for channels to make more people in Europe aware of their business. We have large conglomerates that, or many of the best known names in Sri Lanka, who are involved in order to be well, again, up to date with all the trends that are happening in Europe, as well as, again, looking for particular investment or trade opportunities. And we have a lot of European members, European companies that are based here in Sri Lanka or have subsidiaries here in Sri Lanka. Again, looking for new opportunities, but also wanting to be part of a chamber that enables them to have a voice with the government in terms of some of the policy issues or barriers to doing business and so on. In terms of modalities for joining, the standard process for a company that wants to apply is to apply to the chamber, and I guess at the end of the webinar we'll share the email address and so on and the website. And then we look for companies to be proposed and seconded by 2 of the existing members, and in many cases companies may already know those people, but otherwise we do a sort of short vetting of the company and then find a proposer and seconder. I should add that more recently we have created a special SME category, and for companies that qualify under the SME category, there is a slightly lower joining fee and so on. But even the joining fee and the annual fee, even for large companies, is very reasonable in the sense that it's meant to be accessible for everybody.
Thank you, Simon. I mean, as you said, definitely we will share the contact details, towards the end of this episode. Now, Simon, before moving into the next part of the session, where I want you to put your other hat and talk about, one last question is, can you elaborate on the upcoming activities of the European Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka?
I mean, specifically in the food and agriculture area, one of the activities is actually related to GIZ and the work that it's doing. We are supporting, together with AHK, the representative of German business, a series of workshops and webinars for companies to learn more about organic opportunities in Europe, but also specifically to training workshops to get people ready to interface with European customers, both in terms of sort of the certifications and the rules and regulations that they will have to follow, but also in terms of basic marketing skills. What you need to be ready with, your 30-second pitch if you're on a B2B webinar with potential large wholesalers in Europe, how you need to be ready in terms of fulfillment and follow through after those introductions. So we're doing that series of webinars and training workshops. In addition, we have recently had requests from the State Ministry of Export Agriculture. It's a state ministry actually with a much longer name, but it's fundamentally the State Ministry of Export Agriculture, asking specifically how do we accelerate exports to Europe. And we've had an initial meeting with them, and they have requested us to sort of essentially establish a committee with members from our chamber to advise on initiatives that the government can take at this end to streamline export processes. Obviously there's a little bit of commotion in the government at the moment, but when things have settled down, we hope that's going to become probably a monthly event where we're looking at how the government can support certification processes for agricultural SMEs here, what we can do to streamline export procedures, which are unnecessarily cumbersome from the Sri Lankan end, plus creative ideas for marketing. I don't want to digress too much, but a lot of the marketing in the past by the EDB, frankly, in other sectors, in the tourism board and so on, tends to be focused on big events, and we get stuck sort of selling commodities to large buyers, versus much more creative marketing using influencers in the modern terminology, but really reaching out to chefs, to food writers, to sommeliers, to food and beverage people who are famous in those markets, getting them to see the real high value potential of a lot of the Sri Lankan agricultural products and getting a buzz around those products. Those are some of the ideas we've discussed with the Ministry of Export Agriculture, and we will be rolling out with input from our members over the next few months, we hope. Again, we are also getting more B2B requests. Just got one through today. The Malaysian Chamber of Commerce in Malaysia is organizing a big agricultural event now. Even though we're the European Chamber, knowing that we have a lot of food and agriculture members, they've been inviting us to see if any of our members want to join. That is, I believe, in September. We get requests like that a lot of the time, and again, we promote all of those opportunities to our members.
Thank you for that explanation. And I'm pretty sure this particular episode will act as an incentive for more exporters and other stakeholders in the organic value chain to join hands with your organization. Now let's move into the other part of the discussion, where you have wealth of experience managing an export production business. Why don't you tell us something about Mumbai Estates?
Amber is a strange enterprise in the sense that we are a social enterprise. The reason we are here, the four of us who are the sponsors, all work in economic development around the world. We essentially wanted to put our money where our mouth is and create our own model project, showing people the way we think things should be done, similar to the advice that we've been given in many countries. I say it's a strange enterprise in the sense that normal good business practice is to do one thing and do it well. At Amber, because we want to be a model for others, we deliberately do an awful lot of things. We do handmade artisanal teas, we do coffee, we do a range of spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, lemongrass, all sorts of different spices. With the fruit trees that grow around here, we process the fruit in season into jams and chutneys. Yes, so we do a large range, but all of it on a very small scale. One thing I should say is that, we want to be copied. We are here for other people to copy us. So anybody who wants to find out more, have a look at our website, but please, get in contact and welcome to visit anytime. Deliberately, all of the products we make them as far as possible by hand and on a very small scale and with very limited fancy equipment, again, so it's accessible to other SMEs to be able to start doing something similar. That's really the objective of Amber and what we do. In terms of exports, it is primarily our tea and our spices that get exported. Because we produce in a small scale, we mainly ship by air freight. And for things like the coffee and the jams and the chutneys, they're too expensive to ship by air freight. But the teas we export, teas and tisanes or herbal teas, we export to more than 20 countries around the world, probably almost a dozen countries in Europe, but also US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, pretty much all over the world. And the same with our spices, again, in rather small quantities, but very high quality, organically grown spices, but to a similar cross-section of countries.
Thank you very much, Simon, for the introduction to Amber Estates. And now I would like to explore, your wealth of experience in exporting to the European region. Now, Simon, how would you describe the increasing demand for organic products in the European region?
Essentially, the word I would describe is booming. Across all food categories and agricultural products, demand for organic, for responsible, for ethical products is growing at extremely high rates across Europe, but also in all of the other rich countries around the world, in North America and Japan and Korea and so on. Consumers in those countries are more and more aware of the environmental damage that is being done by our historical consumption patterns with a large focus on quantity rather than quality, excessive chemical use and so on. And consumers are looking for more responsible products, not just in terms of they don't want to be consuming animals or food products that have been filled with chemicals, but also they're worried about the impact that those producing those products is having on the land, on the soil, on the forests and so on in the countries where they come from. With having said that, in general, all organic categories are growing faster than the market as a whole, I see the strongest trends in what I might call the sort of non-essential food items. Although, basic vegetables, basic meat are growing fast, where you see the highest percentage of organic penetration tends to be in the sort of discretionary items that people really want to enjoy something good. So it is some things like tea, coffee, beverages of other types, juices and so on, spices, herbs, perhaps not relevant to Sri Lanka, but things like cheese. It's the products where, in many senses, people think of them as a treat anyway. And when they're having a treat, they really are ready to pay a premium in order to have something very high quality. That is true to a certain extent with basic vegetables and fruit and meat and so on, but perhaps because of budget reasons, they have been slower to convert, or less consumers are ready to pay the premium for those sort of core basket items.
Simon, you stressed upon the point that there's a booming demand for organic products in the world, not only in the European region. Now, in your assessment, is Sri Lanka ready to cater this demand, or do we have the competitive advantage?
My answer would be yes and no. It's very much a question of glass half full. On the one hand, Sri Lanka is very well positioned to serve some of those markets that I was talking about booming in Europe, and particularly the higher value products like tea and coffee and spices and herbs and so on, because 80% of the production in Sri Lanka is already de facto organic, particularly for those products. In other products like rice and vegetables and the staple food, farmers do tend to put in a lot of chemical fertilizers and so on. But most of the tea and the coffee and the spices and the herbs in the country tend to be grown by smallholders in small forest gardens behind their houses. They are a source of supplementary income for the smallholders, and typically they're just plucking the tea once a week, harvesting the coffee when the season comes round, in a small 1 acre behind their house. And they're not crops that they're putting lots of chemicals into. And certainly my experience working with the smallholders around us here at Amba has been that, again, 80% of them are not using chemicals on that. So we have a massive supply base of good organic product. I should add, it's not just the smallholders. There are also in some of these sectors quite advanced large companies that are specializing in doing organic, often doing organic processing of tea and so on, but sourcing their products from smallholders who they have certified as an outgrower network. The negative is that most of that production is not certified as organic or certified as organic in European Union standards, or for that matter, Japanese and American standards and Australian standards. And that's because certification is rather expensive for most small SMEs. That is not the certifier's fault. It takes time and money to get out and visit and inspect and verify the organic practices of small farmers all over the country. But it is a fact of life that it is rather expensive. As a result, the vast majority of SMEs in Sri Lanka, even if they are producing according to organic methods, do not have the required certifications. This is something that we've been talking to the government, and we'll talk about solutions in a minute. But our big challenge is going to be getting more of our smallholders, more of our SMEs organic certified.
Now, Simon, you have been working with organic producers and exporters in Sri Lanka for a long time. And you mentioned our readiness and our competitive advantage in terms of going for exports as well. Now, my final question to you, Simon, is on behalf of the upcoming entrepreneurs into the organic agriculture sector, what they have to look for, and what would be the potential challenges for them, and how can they be ready to overcome those challenges?
First thing I would say is take advantage of all of the training support that is out there. Frankly, even talking for our own enterprise, we converted to organic more than 12, 13 years ago now. We are still learning. We are still improving our practices in terms of mulching and weeding and rebuilding the soil profile and shade cover and how to prune and all the different crops that we have. We are still far from perfect. And over the time, I've got better and better at tapping into all the resources that are out there. Obviously, there are Sri Lankan government agencies that are out there to assist. It varies, unfortunately, from district to district, how much your agrarian officer or your export agriculture officer knows about organic practices. But there are an awful lot of perhaps foreign-sponsored programs that are specifically out there to help people with adapting organic practices, learning better agronomy using organic methods. Not just GIZ, but the European Union, the USAID, AusAid, JICA, a whole lot of NGOs, Practical Action, who are, and for that matter, some of the certifying bodies like Rainforest and Control Union and so on, who can give an awful lot of advice. I mean, one thing I would say is it does take time to convert to organic, and well, not just to convert, but to become expert at organic. So, start investing now, but really reach out and look for all of those resources out there. A lot of them are free and a lot of them are ready to give support, and recognize that it's going to be an ongoing learning process. It's not like you switch the switch and the next day you're doing everything perfectly. You're going to be constantly improving over time. The second thing then obviously is certification, which, as I said, is often a challenge for smaller SMEs because of the cost. Two things I would say there. One, again, check with many of those resources I just mentioned, particularly some of the international agencies like GIZ and USAID and so on. Depending on the region, many of them have programs specifically to bring more SMEs up to speed in Uva or on the East Coast or in the Central Highlands or different parts of the country. And you may find a program that is there to help you both with the process and potentially with the certification cost. The third thing, though, I would say is if there isn't something like that available, look at group options. In the case of our own Ceylon Artisanal Tea Association, we've been talking to a couple of the certification agencies, and they are prepared to do a sort of a group rate for several different small-scale producers like ours in different parts of the country, whereby, I mean, one, we're bringing a volume of business to them, but also we are, in a sense, like an outgrower network, agreeing to police and monitor each other as part of this group. That may be an option if you're a cluster of coconut farmers in one part of the country or spice farmers in another part of the country. On top of that, I hope through some of the conversations that we're having with the government, one of the things that to me is most critical, and I've worked on similar programs in parts of East Africa and Central America, is potentially a matching grant or subsidy aspect for SMEs who are ready to get certified for organic exports. To say, I think those would be my primary aspects. It's one, really looking for all the resources you can on the agronomy side. Two, looking for all the resources you can, and joining, not just joining the European Chamber of Commerce, joining chambers and associations, reaching out to the Spice Board, reaching out to the Export Development Board, or whichever crop set you're in. It's amazing how many resources you will find to help you through those processes. And then after that, through joint marketing and that type of activity. I'm always a big believer in associations and groups coming together. In most industries, the problem is not competition, the problem is critical mass. You are much better, rather than trying to each individually go to Europe or Australia or whatever, marketing your own products. Come up together with your tea products, your coconut products, join your resources, share your resources in order to get the brand for Sri Lankan tea or coconuts or cinnamon or whatever it is recognized by the buyers in that country. You can then start fighting over individual sales, but do the branding, do the marketing collectively, and you'll get much further.
Simon, with that, it brings us to end of our discussion. Thank you very much for sharing your advice, your thought, and your experiences with us, which is going to be very important and valuable for the people who are joining with us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Chatura, for inviting me to be part of this. I do think it's a very exciting opportunity. I'm passionate about organic agriculture myself. I do see it as the wave of the future. I do see that Sri Lanka is well positioned. We're very fortunate, the range of resources we have, the climate we have, the biomass we have, that we can afford to do most things organically. And I do know there's a great market in Europe in particular for these products. And I hope initiatives like this will help more smallholders around Sri Lanka tap into that opportunity. So thank you for inviting me.
That brings to the end of this segment. Those who viewed us, thank you very much for joining. And we hope to come back to you with a new episode very soon.